Beautiful people. Okay, I'm back. I'm doing a brunch viewing, a brunch live feed. It's around brunch time here in, or maybe it's only morning. It's 10:30, so we're getting close to brunch here in Virginia. I usually do it early in the morning, but I've been extra tired lately. I've got a lot on my mind, on my heart. Got a lot. I'm holding. Anyway, so I've been sleeping a little bit in the morning rather than doing the live feed, so I'm going to start doing it in the early or later morning hours. Anyway, we started this Carl Jung book, The Unconscious, and yesterday there was a word I read that I did not know the meaning of, so I'm going to read it again because when you repeat something over and over again, then it sinks into your mind. So I'm doing this for me, for the most part, and if people want to participate, go right ahead. So cogitate, which means, let's see, it's a verb, action word, cogitate. To think seriously and deeply about, ponder, meditate, consider, cogitate. All right, so we're going to cogitate on the works of Carl Jung. Man and his symbols. Let's dive in, shall we? Okay, we shall. Okay, 3 of the 4 evangelists in a relief on Chartres Cathedral appear as animals. The lion is Mark, the ox is Luke, and the eagle is John. Now, I don't know where Chartres Cathedral is, and I'm going to look that up once I stop recording. I can't do it while I'm on the phone. But yeah, Chartres Cathedral. I bet it's somewhere in Europe, but I could be wrong. Anyway, here's the picture. 3 of the 4 evangelists in a relief on Chartres Cathedral appear as animals. The lion is Mark, the ox is Luke, and the eagle is John. See, there's symbolism and religion walking hand in hand, spirituality and religion. The importance of dreams. Man uses the spoken or written word to express the meaning of what he wants to convey. His language is full of symbols, but he also often employs signs or images. I'm going to sit down on the floor. Bloop. And like this. Oh. His language is full of symbols, but he also often employs signs or images that are not strictly descriptive. Some are mere abbreviations or strings of initials, such as UN, comma, UNICEF, or UNESCO. Others are familiar trademarks, the names of patent medicines, badges, or insignia. Although these are meaningless in themselves, they have acquired a recognizable meaning through common usage or deliberate intent. Such things are not symbols. They are signs, and they do no more than denote the objects to which they are attached. This kind of reminds me of when my son was alive, before he was taken by the state of California from me. His physical form was taken from me. he suffered and died in a state hospital against my will and his will. But when he was thriving and living with me, I learned a communication called Unity on a board called Pathfinder, and it was a series of symbols. I can't remember how many pictures now there were. There were quite a number of them, and I had to teach him which symbols to touch together to create a sentence. But these symbols that Carl Jung is talking about were employed on this board. So it's interesting. Okay. Although these are meaningless in themselves, they have acquired a recognizable meaning through common usage or deliberate intent. Such things are not symbols. They are signs, and they do no more than denote the objects to which they are attached. What we call a symbol is a term, a name, or even a picture. Fatboy, what are you doing? That may be familiar in daily life, yet that possesses specific connotations in addition to its conventional and obvious meaning. It implies something vague, unknown, or hidden from us. Many Cretan monuments, for instance, are marked with the design of the double ADZE, ADZ. I'm going to look that up. ADZ. I don't even know how to pronounce it. Stop. Oh my God. That dog. He's only a puppy, but he needs so much attention. It's just insane sometimes. Let's see. Oh, what was that? Here it is. Pronounced, I guess, ads? An axe-like tool for trimming. Okay. And smoothing wood with a curved blade at right angles to the handle. Oh, so it's like a pickaxe. Okay. Learned something new. I love learning. Okay, so many Cretan monuments, for instance, are marked with the design of a double adze. So that's like a pickaxe. This is an object that we know, but we do not know its symbolic implications. For another example, take the case of the Indian who, after a visit to England, told his friends at home that the English worship animals because he had found eagles, lions, and oxen in old churches. He was not aware, nor are many Christians, that these animals are symbols of the evangelists and are derived from the vision of Ezekiel, and that this, in turn, has an analogy to the Egyptian sun god, Horus, and his 4 sons. There are, moreover, such objects as the wheel and the cross that are known all over the world, yet they have symbolic significance under certain conditions. Precisely what they symbolize is still a matter for controversial speculation. Thus, a word or an image is symbolic when it implies something more than its obvious and immediate meaning. It has a wider, unconscious aspect that is never precisely defined or fully explained. I love it. Nor can one hope to define or explain it. As the mind explores the symbol, it is led to ideas that lie beyond the grasp of reason. The wheel may lead our thoughts toward the concept of a divine sun, but at this point, reason must admit its incompetence. Man is unable to define a divine being. When, with all our intellectual limitations, we call something divine, we have merely given it a name, which may be based on a creed, but never on factual evidence. Factual evidence. Because there are innumerable things beyond the range of human understanding. We constantly use symbolic terms to represent concepts that we cannot define or fully comprehend. This is one reason why all religions employ symbolic language or images. But this conscious use of symbols is only one aspect of psychological fact of great importance. Man also produces symbols unconsciously and spontaneously in the form of dreams. It is not easy to grasp this point, but the point must be grasped if we are to know more about the ways in which the human mind works. Man, as we realize, if we reflect for a moment, never perceives anything fully or comprehends anything completely. He can see, hear, touch, and taste, but how far he sees, how well he hears, what his touch tells him, and what he tastes depends on the number and quality of his senses. These limit his perception of the world around him. By using scientific instruments, he can partly compensate for the deficiencies of his senses. For example, he can extend the range of his vision by binoculars or by his hearing by electrical amplification. But the most elaborate apparatus lost my spot. But the most elaborate apparatus cannot do more than bring distant or small objects within range of his eyes, or make faint sounds more audible. No matter what instruments he uses, at some point he reaches the edge of certainty beyond which conscious knowledge cannot pass. There are, moreover, unconscious aspects of our perception of reality. Unconscious aspects of our perception of reality. I like that. The first is the fact that even when our senses react to real phenomena, sights and sounds, they are somehow translated from the realm of reality into that of mind. Within the mind, they become psychic events whose ultimate nature is unknowable, for the psyche cannot know its own physical substance. Thus, every experience contains an indefinite number of unknown factors. Thus, every experience contains an indefinite number of unknown factors, not to speak of the fact that every concrete object is always unknown in certain respects. But we cannot know the ultimate nature of matter itself. Then there are certain events of which we cannot consciously take a note. We have not consciously taken note. Then there are certain events of which we have not consciously taken note. They have remained, so to speak, below the threshold of consciousness. They have happened, but they have been absorbed subliminally without our conscious knowledge. We can become aware of such happenings only in a moment of intuition, or by a process of profound thought that leads to a later realization that they must have happened And though we may have originally ignored their emotional or vital importance, it later wells up from the unconscious as a sort of afterthought. It may appear, for instance, in the form of a dream. As a general rule, the unconscious aspect of any event is revealed to us in dreams, where it appears not as a rational thought, but as a symbolic image. As a matter of history, it was the study of dreams that first enabled psychologists to investigate the unconscious aspect of conscious psychic events. I'm going to read that again because it's a pretty dense sentence. As a matter of history, it was the study of dreams that first enabled psychologists to investigate the unconscious aspect of conscious psychic events. So this reminds me of a dream I had the other day when I was sleeping on the sofa. I took a nap, and I had this dream that two of my neighbors in the area where I live in a trailer park, two of the neighbors had come knocking on my door. Now here's just a little piece of the neighbors that are in my trailer park. I know some of them fairly well. I mean, I know them, what they present to me, and that's all I know. I can pick up on cues or innuendos or glances or energies, but I only know what they will show me. So anyway, there's two neighbors I don't know so well. I only know what they show me, but I have had some suspicions that they're not always authentic with how they present themselves. They knocked on my door, and when I opened the door, a praying mantis grabbed on my neck and was clutching my neck. And I couldn't wake myself up for the life of me. It took me, it felt real. It took me a minute to wake myself up and realize it was all a dream. So that's like the unconscious becoming conscious. That means something. What it means, I haven't figured out, but it's something that I'm now aware of. Interesting, huh? Okay, so let's see here. It is on such evidence that psychologists assume the existence of an unconscious psyche, though many scientists and philosophers deny its existence. How could you do that? I'm going to read that again. It is on such evidence that psychologists assume the existence of an unconscious psyche, though many scientists and philosophers deny its existence. They argue naively that such an assumption implies the existence of two subjects, or, to put it in common phrase, two personalities within the same individual. But this is exactly what it does imply, quite correctly. And it is one of the curses of modern man that many people suffer from this divided personality. It is by no means a pathological symptom. It is a normal fact that can be observed at any time and everywhere. It is not merely the neurotic whose right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. This predicament is a symptom of a general unconscious that is undeniable, that is the undeniable common inheritance of all of mankind. From your low-life drug addicts, which I'm not saying they're low-lifes, that's just a blanket statement, judgment, stereotype, to our freaking judges in our courtrooms, to our politicians, which is becoming more obvious now, today, that there's some real corruption happening in the world from our higher-ups, that people are finally, not claiming conspiracy theory anymore. I'm going to read that again. This predicament, the predicament of the predicament of the two personalities within the same individual, okay? The divided personality is a normal fact that can be observed at any time and everywhere. It is not merely a neurotic It is not merely the neurotic whose right hand does not know what the left hand is doing. The predicament is a symptom of a general unconscious that is undeniable, common inheritance in all of mankind. All of mankind. Judges, attorneys, those little MFers have a dark side. Trust me. I've seen it unleashed on my children. And my daughter's father totally took advantage of his vulnerable state of always wanting to be validated and wanting to be popular. They took his childhood wounds and ran with them. He's dead now. Man has developed consciousness slowly and laboriously in a process that took untold ages to reach the civilized state, which is arbitrarily dated from the invention of script about 4000 BC. And this evolution is far from complete. For large areas of the human mind are still shrouded in darkness. What we call the psyche is by no means identical with our consciousness and its contents. What we call the psyche is by no means identical with our consciousness and its contents. Okay, so then up here on this, I'm going to show you a picture. They have a picture of a photograph. 3 of the sons of the Egyptian god Horus are animals. Animals and groups of 4 are universal religious symbols. So to separate religion from Greek mythology and Egyptian and all that stuff, to just like, you have these Christian fundamentalists who don't even do any research into mythology. It's just kind of wild to me. 3 of the sons of the Egyptian god Horus are animals. Animals and groups of 4 are universal religious symbols. Whoever denies the existence of the unconscious is in fact assuming that our present knowledge of the psyche is total. And this belief is clearly just as false as the assumption that we know all there is to be known about the natural universe. Our psyche is a part of nature, and its enigma is limitless. Thus, we cannot define either the psyche or nature. We can merely state that what we believe them to be and describe, as best we can, how they function. Quite apart, therefore, from the evidence that medical research has accumulated, there are strong grounds of logic for rejecting statements like, there is no unconscious. Those who say such things merely express an age-old misonism, a fear of the new and the unknown. Okay, misonism, a fear of the new and the unknown. Misonism. All right, look that up later. It's a new word for me. Let's write it down here in my journal. M-I-S-O-N-E, misonism. There we go. Now, there are historical reasons for this resistance to the idea of an unknown part of the human psyche. Consciousness is a very recent acquisition of nature, and it is still an experimental, in quotation, state. It is frail, menaced by specific dangers, and easily injured. And anthropologists have noted one of the most common mental derangements that occur among primitive people is what they call the loss of a soul. This is really good stuff, which means, as the name indicates, a noticeable disruption, or more technically, a disassociation of consciousness. Among such people whose consciousness is at a different level of development from ours, the soul, in quotations, or psyche, is not felt to be a unit. Many primitives assume that a man has a bush soul as well as his own, and that this bush soul is incarnate in a wild animal or a tree with which the human individual has some kind of psychic identity. This is what the distinguished French ethnologist Lucien Lévy-Bruhl called a mystical participation. He later retracted this term under pressure. Under pressure. Isn't that crazy? Don't say what you know. You might get in trouble. They might even terrorize you, make you think you're crazy. This is what the distinguished French ethnologist Lucien Lévy-Bruhl called a mystical participation. He later retracted this term under pressure of adverse criticism, but I believe that his critics were wrong. It is a well-known psychological fact that an individual may have such an unconscious identity with some other person or object. It is a well-known psychological fact that an individual may have such an unconscious identity with some other person or object. I'm going to keep my thoughts to myself on this one as it relates to my personal life story. This identity takes a variety of forms among primitives. If the bush soul is that of an animal, the animal itself is considered as some sort of brother to man. A man whose brother is a crocodile, for instance, is supposed to be safe when swimming a crocodile-infested river. Crocodile was in my dream last night. If the bush soul is a tree, the tree is presumed to have something like parental authority over the individual concerned. In both cases, an injury to the bush soul is interpreted as an injury to the man. In some tribes, it is assumed that a man has a number of souls. This belief expresses the feeling of some primitive individuals that each consist of several linked but distinct units. This means that the individual's psyche is far from being safely synthesized. On the contrary, it threatens to fragment only too easily under the onslaught of unchecked emotions. Unchecked emotions can wreak havoc on a psyche. Unchecked emotions. I'm speaking from experience here. After my son was killed and I put all the blame on myself. It was all my fault. And that negative emotion, unchecked negative emotion that the people who were involved let me run wild with, let me run wild, let me believe it was all my fault, wreaked havoc on my psyche. While this situation is familiar to us from the studies of anthropologists, it is not so irrelevant to our own advanced civilization as it might seem. We too can become disassociated and lose our identity. Oh, yes, we can. We can be possessed and altered by moods, or become unreasonable and unable to recall important facts about ourselves or others, so that people ask, "What the devil has got into you?" We talk about being able to control ourselves, but self-control is a rare and remarkable virtue. We may think we have ourselves under control, yet a friend can easily tell us things about ourselves of which we have no knowledge. Beyond doubt, even what we call a high level of civilization, human consciousness has not yet achieved a reasonable degree of continuity. It is still vulnerable and liable to fragmentation. This capacity to isolate part of one's mind, indeed, is a valuable characteristic. It enables us to concentrate upon one thing at a time, excluding everything else that may claim our attention. Okay. It is still vulnerable and liable to fragmentation. This capacity to isolate part of one's mind, indeed, is a valuable characteristic. It enables us to concentrate upon one thing at a time, excluding everything else that may claim our attention. But there is a world of difference between a conscious decision to split off and temporarily suppress a part of one's psyche and a condition in which this happens spontaneously, without one's knowledge or consent or even against one's intention. The former is a civilized achievement, the latter a primitive loss of soul, or even the pathological cause of a neurosis. So that happened to me after Bodhi was killed. About the 3rd year after his death, I kind of lost it and had a loss of soul because I blamed myself. I completely and utterly put it all on myself. And I had something also called a spiritual emergency. Okay, let's see. Thus, even in our day, the unity of consciousness is still a double affair. It can too easily be disrupted. An ability to control one's emotions that may be very desirable from one point of view would be a questionable accomplishment from another, for it would deprive social intercourse of variety, color, and warmth. It is against this background that we must review the importance of dreams. Those flimsy, evasive, unreliable, vague, and uncertain fantasies. To explain my point of view, I would like to describe how it developed over a period of years, and how I was led to conclude that dreams are the most frequent and universally accessible source for the investigation of man's symbolizing faculty. Sigmund Freud, let me see how long chapter is going to be. A long chapter. Probably won't read the whole thing. I have to go to the gym later. I'll stop somewhere and start up again, because this is fascinating. Sigmund Freud was the pioneer who first tried to explore empirically the unconscious background of consciousness. He worked on the general assumption that dreams are not a matter of chance, but are associated with the conscious thoughts and problems. This assumption was not in the least arbitrary. It was based upon the conclusion of eminent neurologists, for instance, Pierre Janet, that neurotic symptoms are related to some conscious experience. They even appear to be split off areas of the conscious mind, which at another time and under different conditions can be conscious. Before the beginning of this century, Freud and Josef Breuer had recognized that neurotic symptoms, hysteria, certain types of pain, and abnormal behavior are in fact symbolically meaningful. They are one way in which the unconscious mind expresses itself, just as it may in dreams, and they are equally symbolic. They are one way in which the unconscious mind expresses itself, just as it may in dreams, and they are equally symbolic. A patient, for instance, who is confronted with an intolerable situation may develop a spasm whenever he tries to swallow. He can't swallow it under similar conditions of psychological stress. Another patient has an attack of asthma. He can't breathe the atmosphere at home. So this is like the Louise Hay. This is kind of like Louise Hay and her work, how all physical symptoms have a spiritual reason behind it. A third suffers from a peculiar paralysis of the legs. He can't walk. He can't go on anymore. A fourth, who vomits when he eats, cannot digest. That's my mom. She has a very bad acid reflux. She sometimes will just puke up everything, but it's been less and less the more time I spend with her and the more time she gets out and is living somewhat of a productive life instead of laying there thinking about all the things she's done wrong her whole life and allowing her energy to be sucked up by people who agree with that thought that she has. Yeah, okay, this lady It feels terribly about herself. She's ruined her children's lives. She ruined her husband's life. It's all her fault. And then she's got people around her saying, yeah, it is all your fault. It's so wrong. It's so wrong. Like when I blamed myself for my son's death, and I had people who were more participants in his death than I was saying, yeah, it is all your fault. It's wrong. It's criminal. It's downright criminal. Okay, so let's see where I was on the vomiting part. A fourth who vomits when he eats cannot digest some unpleasant fact. I could cite many examples of this kind, but such physical reactions are only one form in which the problems that trouble us unconsciously may express themselves. They more often find expression in our dreams. Any psychologist who has listened to numbers of people describing their dreams knows that dream symbols have much greater variety than the physical symptoms of neurosis. They often consist of elaborate and picturesque fantasies. But if the analyst who is confronted by this dream material uses Freud's original technique of free association, he finds that dreams can eventually be reduced to certain basic patterns. This technique played an important part in the development of psychoanalysis, for it enabled Freud to use dreams as the starting point from which the unconscious problem of the patient might be explored. Freud made the simple but penetrating observation that if a dreamer is encouraged to go on talking about his dream images and the thoughts that these prompt in his mind, he will give himself away and reveal the unconscious background of his ailments. In both what he says and what he deliberately omits saying. His ideas may seem irrational and irrelevant, but after a time it becomes relatively easy to see what it is he is trying to avoid. Interesting. What unpleasant thought or experience is he suppressing? No matter how he tries to camouflage it, anything he says points to the core of his predicament. A doctor sees so many things from the seamy side of life that he is seldom far from the truth when he interprets the hints that his patient produces as signs of an uneasy conscience. What he eventually discovers, unfortunately, confirms his expectations. Thus far, nobody can say anything against Freud's theory of repression and wish fulfillment as apparent causes of dream symbolism. Freud attached particular importance to dreams at the point of departure for a process of free association. But after a time, I began to feel that this was misleading and inadequate use of the rich fantasies that the unconscious produces in sleep. My doubts really began when a colleague told me of an experience he had during the course of a long training journey in Russia. Though he did not know the language and could not even decipher the Cyrillic script, he found himself musing over the strange letters in which the railway notices were written, and he fell into a reverie in which he imagined all sorts of meanings for them. One idea led to another, and in his relaxed mood, he found that his free association had stirred up many old memories. Among them, he was annoyed to find some long-buried disagreeable topics. Things he had wished to forget and had forgotten consciously. He had, in fact, arrived at what psychologists would call his complexes, that is, repressed and emotional themes that can cause constant psychological disturbances or even, in many cases, the symptoms of neurosis. I'm trying to figure out where I should quit pretty soon. The episode opened my eyes to the fact that it was not necessary to use a dream as the point of departure for the process of free association is if one wished to discover the complexes of a patient. It showed me that one can reach the center directly from any point of the compass. One could begin from Cyrillic letters from meditations upon a crystal ball, a prayer wheel, or a modern painting, or even from casual conversation about some trivial event. The dream was no more or no less useful in this respect than any other possible starting point. Nevertheless, dreams have a particular significance, even though they often arise from an emotional upset in which the habitual complexes are also involved. The habitual complexes are the tender spots of the psyche, which react most quickly to an external stimulus or disturbance. That is why free association can lead one from any dream to the critical secret thoughts. At this point, however, it occurred to me that, if I was right so far, it might reasonably follow that dreams have some special and more significant function of their own. Very often, dreams have a definite, evidently purposeful structure, indicating an underlying idea or intention, though as a rule the latter is not immediately comprehensible. I therefore began to consider whether one should pay more attention to the actual form and content of a dream rather than allowing free association to lead one off through a train of ideas to complexes that could as easily be reached by other means. This new thought was a turning point in the development of my psychology. It meant that I gradually gave up following associations that led far away from the text of the dream. I chose to concentrate rather on the associations to the dream itself, believing that the latter expressed something specific that the unconscious was trying to say. The change in my attitude toward dreams involved a change of method. The new technique was one that could take account of all the various wider aspects of a dream. A story told by the conscious mind has a beginning, a development, and an end. But the same is not true of a dream. Its dimensions in time and space are quite different. To understand it, you must examine it from every aspect, just as you may take an unknown object in your hands and turn it over and over until you are familiar with every detail of its shape. Perhaps I have now said enough to show how I came increasingly to disagree with free association, as Freud first employed it. I wanted to keep as close as possible to the dream itself, and to exclude all the irrelevant ideas and associations that it might evoke. True, these could lead one toward the complexes of a patient, but I had a more far-reaching purpose in mind than the discovery of complexes that cause neurotic disturbances. There are many other means by which these can be identified. The psychologist, for instance, can get all these hints he needs by using word association tests, by asking the patient what he associates to a given set of words, and by studying his responses. But to know and understand the psychic life process of an individual's whole personality, it is important to realize that his dreams and their symbolic images have a much more important role to play. Almost everyone knows, for example, that there is an enormous variety of images by which the sexual act can be symbolized, or, one might say, represented in the form of an allegory. Each of these images can lead, by a process of association, to the idea of sexual intercourse and to specific complexes that any individual may have about his own sexual attitudes. But one could just as well unearth such complexes by daydreaming on a set of indecipherable Russian letters. I was thus led to the assumption that a dream can contain some message other than the sexual allegory, and that it does so for definite reasons. To illustrate this point, a man may dream of inserting a key in a lock, of wielding a heavy stick, or of breaking down a door with a battering ram. Each of these can be regarded as a sexual allegory. But the fact that his unconscious, for its own purposes, has chosen one of these specific images, it may be the key, the stick, or the battering ram, is also of major significance. The real task is to understand why the key has been preferred to the stick, or the stick to the ram. And sometimes this might even lead one to discover that it is not the sexual act at all that it is represented, but some quite different psychological point. For this line of reasoning, I conclude that only the material that is clearly and visibly part of a dream should be used in interpreting it. The dream has its own limitation. Its specific form itself tells us what belongs to it and what leads away from it. While free association lures one away from the material in a kind of zigzag line, the method I evolved is more like a circambulation whose center is the dream picture. I work all around the dream picture and disregard every attempt that the dreamer makes to break away from it. Time and time again in my professional work, I have had to repeat the words, "Let's get back to your dream. What does the dream say?" For instance, a patient of mine dreamed of a drunken and disheveled vulgar woman. In the dream, it seemed that this woman was his wife, though in real life his wife was totally different. On the surface, therefore, the dream was shockingly untrue, and the patient immediately rejected it as dream nonsense. If I, as his doctor, had let him start a process of association, he would inevitably have tried to get as far as possible away as possible from the unpleasant suggestion of his dream. In that case, he would have ended with one of his staple complexes, a complex possibly that had nothing to do with his wife, and we should have learned nothing about the special meaning of this particular dream. What then was his unconscious trying to convey by such an obvious untrue statement? Clearly, it somehow expressed the idea of a degenerate female who was closely connected with the dreamer's life. But since the projection of this image onto his wife was unjustified and factually untrue, I had to look elsewhere before I found out what this repulsive image represented. In the Middle Ages, long before the psychologists demonstrated that by reason of our glandular structure, there are both male and female elements in all of us. It was said that every man carries a woman within himself. It is this female element in every male that I have called the anima, this feminine aspect of essentially a certain inferior kind of relatedness to the surroundings and particularly to women, which is kept carefully concealed from others as well as from oneself. In other words, though an individual's visible personality might seem quite normal, he may well be concealing from others, or even himself, the deplorable condition of the woman within. That was the case with this particular patient. His female side was not nice. His dream was actually saying to him, "You are in some respects behaving like a degenerate female," and thus gave him an appropriate shock. An example of this kind, of course, must be taken as evidence that the unconscious is concerned with moral injunctions. The dream was not telling the patient to behave better, but was simply trying to balance the lopsided nature of his conscious mind, which was maintaining the fiction that he was a perfect gentleman throughout. It is easy to understand why dreamers tend to ignore and even deny the message of their dreams. Consciousness naturally resists anything unconscious and unknown. I have already pointed out the existence among primitive peoples of what anthropologists called misonism, a deep and superstitious fear of novelty. The primitives manifest all the reactions of the wild animal against untoward events. But civilized man reacts to new ideas in much the same way, erecting psychological barriers to protect himself from the shock of facing something new. This can easily be observed in any individual's reaction to his own dreams when obliged to emit a surprising thought. Many pioneers in philosophy, science, and even literature have been victims of this innate conservation of their contemporaries. Psychology is one of the youngest of the sciences because it attempts to deal with the working of the unconscious. It has inevitably encountered misonism in an extreme form. And then there's a couple of pictures here that I didn't get a chance to. Okay, the ink blot test devised by Swiss psychiatrist Hermann Rorschach. The shape of the blot can serve as stimulus for free association. In fact, almost any irregular free shape can spark off the associative process. Leonardo da Vinci wrote in his notebooks, "It should not be hard for you to stop sometimes and look into the stains of walls, or ashes of a fire, or clouds, or mud, or like places in which you may find really marvelous ideas." I know that's true. In this picture, one of the countless symbolic or allegoric images of the sexual act is a deer hunt, a detail from a painting by the 16th century German artist Cranach. The sexual implication of the deer hunt is underlined by a medieval English folk song called The Keeper. The first doe that he shot at, he missed. The second doe he trimmed, he kissed. And the third ran away in a young man's heart, she amongst the leaves of green. Oh. And here's another picture. A key in the lock may be a sexual symbol, but not invariably. A section of an altarpiece by the 15th century Flemish artist Campin. The door was intended to symbolize hope, the lock to symbolize charity, and the key to symbolize the desire for God. And I noticed that Bear Grylls said hi. Hi, Bear Grylls. I'm just really reading, and I'm not going to be communicating too much, but I appreciate you saying hello. And if this is not what you were looking for on this channel, you can always go somewhere else. That's it for now.